up, everybody? It's your boy, Matthew Walden. Welcome back to Devotionables, brief devotions for busy people just like you. Today we're going to be looking at chapters 3 and 4 of the book of Esther to finish up this week's reading in the F260 plan. So thus far in Esther, we've seen Esther become the queen, and she was there and she kind of ratted out these two guys who wanted to kill the king, and so she gained even more favor with the king. And so as chapter 3 begins, we're introduced to this new character in the book of Esther, a guy named Haman. And Haman, he is an Agagite, and he is someone who comes from the lineage of the Canaanites. And so when he gets put into authority by the king, he calls for all of the king's servants to bow down and pay homage to him. One of the king's servants at this time is a guy named Mordecai, the father of Esther. And so he absolutely rejects the fact that he is going to bow down and pay homage to this guy named Haman. And so Haman sees this, he hates this, he learns that Mordecai is a Jewish man, someone who fears God. And so what does he want to do? He wants to kill not just Mordecai, but he wants to kill all of the Israelites, all of the Jewish people. And so he goes to the king, and Haman says to the king, he says, there's this people, and they're scattered abroad, and they're dispersed among our peoples, and their laws are different from ours, and their king, they worship someone else, right? And we should kill them. And the king says, you know what? You're right. We should kill them. And so he sends out a decree to all the provinces that he is over to kill the Jewish people in a certain month and a certain day. And so Mordecai hears of this. He tears his clothes, he weeps, and then Esther, his daughter, sees his lament, hears of his lament, and she inquires. She says, what's going on? And so when Mordecai tells Esther what happened, he actually also incites her. He says, go to the king and go there and ask him to take away this decree so that the people of Israel, the Jewish people, will not be killed. And this is Esther's response to him. She says, all the king's servants and all the people of the king's provinces know that if any man or woman goes to the king inside the inner court without being called, there is but one law, to be put to death. And so Esther says, if I go before him, basically I'm going to die. And what is Mordecai's response to this? He says to her, do not think to yourself that if in the king's palace you will escape any more than any of the other Jews. You too will die, basically, is what he's saying, if you do not go to the king. And then in verse 14 of chapter 4, Mordecai says to Esther, for if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place. But you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this. Basically, Mordecai is saying to Esther, he says, who knows? Maybe this is exactly why you won that little contest, right? Maybe this is exactly why you're the queen in this nation right now, for this purpose, to intercede, if you will, for our people to the king, to save all of us. And so, as we think about this story, I think the idea of who knows, maybe God has a specific purpose for you in this circumstance. I think that's just extremely relevant for us as Christians to think about. And I just want to point out 3 things for us to kind of meditate on throughout this day. And so the first one, I think that we need to remember that we as Christians, we're not merely deists. We don't believe that God just creates the world, puts it into motion, and steps back and doesn't intervene, doesn't have a specific purpose for the things that are happening. So I remember when I was younger, I would go on vacations. There was one time I went on a vacation to the beach somewhere, and we went by Ripley's Believe It or Not kind of exhibit, and there's this giant boulder, and there's like a water fountain up under it, and it's kind of like a levitating rock, but you just push it, and it moves, and it keeps rotating because it's kind of lifted up by the water. And sometimes people kind of perceive God like that. You know, they perceive that God can come in and that he pushes, or he creates with force a certain thing, and he just steps back and it continues spinning. And that's not what we as Christians believe about how God interacts with his creation. The second thing we need to think about is is that we believe that God is intimately involved with His creation. So opposed to being just deists, we believe that based on the Bible, God is intimately involved with His creation. So He has His people's holiness in mind, and so when you are going through the circumstances of life, when hard things arise, when sin is brought to your attention, oftentimes that is because God has your holiness in mind. And He also has His glory in mind. And so the hard things that we walk through, whether it be sickness, whether it be loss, whether it be death, or something else, it's because God has our holiness in mind and His glory in mind. And we may not understand fully what He's doing, but we can trust, based on His character as revealed in Scripture, that He has good in mind, His glory, our holiness. And I think the third thing for us to meditate on as we go throughout this day is that we should find comfort in knowing that our God is intimately involved in His creation. We should find solace in knowing that no sparrow, falls from the sky without God ordaining that. Nothing happens in our lives, good or bad, without God having set that into motion. And so that does bring us comfort as Christians. And so I just want you to hold on to that as you go throughout the rest of your day. I hope you guys have a wonderful day. Thanks.